Reba McEntire is the woman who taught America that strength doesn't have to be loud, that grace doesn't have to be weak, and that a girl from Oklahoma can conquer the world without losing herself in the process. But on this particular morning at Good Morning America, someone decided that the Queen had worn her crown too long. Someone decided it was time to ask the questions no one had dared to ask. And someone was about to learn that the sweetest voice in country music belonged to a woman who had survived things that would break most people, and who wasn't about to be broken by a morning show host with an agenda. Subscribe and drop a comment below, because what happens next will make you see Reba McEntire in a way you never have before. The Good Morning America studio in Times Square was buzzing with a particular energy that morning. Reba McEntire was in the building, and everyone from the interns to the senior producers seemed to stand a little straighter, smile a little wider. Her smile already in place as she waved to the studio audience. Robin Roberts rushed forward to embrace her like an old friend, which in many ways she was. Michael Strahan's massive frame seemed to shrink as he practically giggled with excitement at meeting her. These were genuine reactions from genuine fans. George Stephanopoulos hung back slightly, his expression pleasant but unreadable. The former political operative turned journalist had a folder of notes that seemed thicker than what he usually brought for entertainment interviews. He had been unusually quiet during the pre-show meeting, asking questions about Reba's political stance and her brand management that had made the producers exchange nervous glances. Reba McEntire, welcome to Good Morning America, Robin said warmly as they all settled into their chairs. It is so wonderful to have you here. You look absolutely gorgeous. Oh, honey, thank you. You're too sweet, Reba replied, her Oklahoma accent wrapping around the words like a warm blanket. I've been looking forward to this all week. I love this show. We love having you, Michael added, his smile genuine and wide. Now, you've got so much going on. The Voice, new music, touring. How do you have the energy? What's your secret? Reba laughed, that familiar sound that had been a staple of American entertainment for generations. I don't know about any secret, Michael. I just love what I do. When you're doing something you love, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a blessing. Speaking of blessings, George interjected, and there was something in his tone that made Robin glance at him with a subtle frown. You've built quite an empire over the years. Music, acting, business ventures. Some might say you've become more of a brand than an artist. How do you respond to that criticism? The question landed differently than the warm exchanges that had preceded it. Reba's smile remained, but there was a slight tightening around her eyes that longtime observers would recognize. Well, George, I think you can be both. I think you can run a business and still be an artist. The music has always come first for me. Everything else grew out of that. But hasn't the music changed? Your early work was raw, authentic country. Now some critics say you've become too polished, too commercial, that you've sacrificed authenticity for mass appeal. Robin shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This was not the direction anyone had expected the interview to take. I think my music has evolved, like I have, Reba replied, her voice still pleasant, but with a new edge of steel beneath the warmth. I'd hoped that after 40 years, I wouldn't be making the exact same music I made when I was 25. That wouldn't be growth. That would be stagnation. But is it evolution or calculation? Because you've managed to stay relevant in a way that most artists from your era haven't. And some people wonder if that's because you're willing to change who you are to fit whatever the market demands. Michael's smile had faded. He looked at George with an expression that mixed confusion with something approaching irritation. This wasn't the interview they had discussed. George, I'm not sure what you're getting at, Reba said, her voice dropping slightly in temperature. But I've never changed who I am for anybody. I've grown. I've learned. I've adapted. But the core of who I am, the values I was raised with on that ranch in Oklahoma, those haven't changed since I was a little girl singing at rodeos. Let's talk about those values, George pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort growing around the table. You've been notably silent on political issues throughout your career. In today's climate, some see that as a refusal to take a stand, a way of protecting your brand by not alienating any segment of your audience. The accusation hung in the air. Reba was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. I make music for everyone, George. Republicans, Democrats, independents, people who don't care about politics at all. When someone's going through a hard time and they put on one of my songs, I don't want them thinking about who I voted for. I want them feeling less alone. But isn't that a luxury? The ability to stay above the fray while others fight for causes that affect real people's lives. Robin finally intervened. George, I think what Reba is saying is that music can be a unifying force, and maybe we need more of that in this country. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Robin, George replied, not taking his eyes off Reba. But I think it's a fair question. In an era when artists are expected to use their platforms for social change, Reba McEntire has consistently chosen not to. I'm asking why. And while we're asking questions, George continued before Reba could respond. Let's talk about your personal life. Your marriage to Narvel Blackstock ended after 26 years. You portrayed it publicly as an amicable split, but some sources suggest the reality was more complicated. And then you moved on rather quickly to Rex Lynn. Don't you think that timeline raised some eyebrows? The shift to personal territory was jarring. Michael actually leaned forward as if to physically stop the conversation. Robin's face showed open shock. My personal life is exactly that. Personal, Reba said, her voice dropping in temperature noticeably. But since you brought it up, I'll say this. Narvel and I grew apart after many years together. It happens. It's painful. And it's nobody's business but ours. As for Rex, I was alone for several years before we started dating. And even if I wasn't, I don't owe anyone an explanation for finding love again. But you're a public figure. Your wholesome image has been central to your brand. When the reality of your personal life doesn't match the image, isn't that worth examining? Worth examining by whom? By you? A man I've met exactly twice in my entire life? You want to sit here and question my marriage, my relationship, my choices, as if you have any idea what my life has actually been like. Reba leaned forward slightly, and there was something different in her expression now. The perpetual warmth had cooled to something more serious. You want to know why I don't talk politics, George? Let me tell you a story. In 1991, 8 members of my band died in a plane crash. 8 people I loved. 8 families that were destroyed. And you know who showed up at those funerals? Republicans and Democrats. Liberals and conservatives. People who disagreed about everything except one thing. They were there to support me and those families in the worst moment of our lives. The studio fell silent. Even George seemed momentarily taken aback. I learned something that day that I've never forgotten. When tragedy strikes, when life gets hard, politics doesn't matter. What matters is being there for each other. And if I can make music that brings people together instead of dividing them, then that's what I'm going to do. Call it protecting my brand if you want. I call it remembering what actually matters. Her voice had cracked slightly on the word matters, and Robin reached over to touch her arm supportively. Michael looked like he wanted to hug her. George, however, seemed to view this as an opening rather than a moment for compassion. That tragedy was over 30 years ago, and you've certainly used it effectively in your narrative. The survivor who keeps going. The strong woman who doesn't let anything stop her. But at what point does sharing that story become exploiting it? The accusation landed like a physical blow. Reba's face went through a series of emotions, shock, hurt, anger, before settling on something cold and controlled. Excuse me. I'm asking whether the plane crash has become part of your brand. Something you invoke when you need sympathy or when you want to deflect from harder questions. Robin's face had gone pale. George, that's completely inappropriate. It's a legitimate question. She brings it up in interviews. It's mentioned in her biography. It's part of the Reba McEntire story that gets told and retold. I'm asking whether that story has become a marketing tool. Reba stood up slowly, and the movement seemed to shift the entire energy of the room. At 70 years old, standing 5'7" in heels, she somehow seemed to tower over everyone. I'm going to say this once, and I'm going to say it clearly. Those 8 people who died were not a marketing tool. They were my friends, my family, people I had traveled with, laughed with, cried with. And not a day goes by that I don't think about them. Her voice was shaking now, but not with weakness, with fury. I don't talk about that crash to get sympathy. I talk about it because people need to know that you can survive the worst thing imaginable and still find reasons to keep going. Because somewhere out there, someone is going through their own tragedy and they need to know they're not alone. That's not marketing, George. That's humanity. George remained seated, his expression unchanged. But surely you can understand why some might see it differently. Why some might question whether grief has become performative after 30 years. Performative. Reba's voice rose, and the studio audience, which had been silent, seemed to collectively hold its breath. You want to talk about performative? Let's talk about a journalist who spends years in politics, helps spin stories for the Clinton administration, and then puts on a serious face and pretends to be an objective reporter. That's performative, George. That's a performance that's been running for decades. The counterattack was unexpected and precise. George's expression finally changed, a flash of something that might have been anger crossing his carefully composed features. We're not here to talk about my career. No, we're here so you can question mine. So you can imply that my grief is fake, my values are calculated, and my entire career is one big marketing scheme. Well, let me tell you something about my career. She pointed directly at George, her fingers steady despite the emotion in her voice. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've sold 75 million records. I've won awards that most people can't even pronounce. And I've done it all while being exactly who I am. Not who some consultant told me to be. Not who the market demanded. Me, Reba McEntire from Chalky, Oklahoma. She paused, gathering herself. And let's talk about The Voice, since you seem so interested in my career. You want to know why I'm on that show? Because I get to help young artists who are just starting out. I get to tell them what I wish someone had told me when I was their age. That this business will try to change you, will try to mold you into something you're not. And the only way to survive is to hold on to who you really are. Her voice strengthened. Every single contestant I've worked with knows that I'm in their corner. Not because it's good for my brand, but because I remember what it was like to be young and scared and desperate for someone to believe in you. My mama believed in me. My daddy believed in me. And now I get to be that person for someone else. That's not calculation, George. That's paying it forward. Michael tried to interject. Reba, I think we all just want to. No, Michael, honey, I appreciate you, but this needs to be said. She turned back to George. You sit there in your expensive suit with your political background and your carefully crafted image, and you have the audacity to question my authenticity? To suggest that my grief is a brand strategy? She shook her head, and there was something almost like pity in her expression. I was singing at rodeos when I was a teenager. I was watching my daddy rope steers, and my mama raise 4 kids on a working ranch. I learned about hard work and integrity and treating people right long before I ever saw the inside of a recording studio. And those values aren't a brand. They're who I am. I'm not questioning your background, George said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. I'm questioning whether the person we see today is the same as the person who grew up on that ranch, or whether fame and success have transformed you into something more calculated. You know what's calculated, George? This interview. These questions. The way you've been trying to get me to say something controversial since the moment I sat down. That's calculated. That's manufactured. I came here to talk about my music and my tour and the wonderful opportunity one have on The Voice. Instead, I'm being interrogated about whether my grief is real and my values are authentic. Robin stood up now, placing herself slightly between Reba and George. I think we should take a break. This interview has gone in a direction that none of us intended. Oh, I think it went exactly where George intended, Reba replied. Didn't it, George? You wanted a moment. A clip. Something that would go viral. Reba McEntire loses her temper on GMA. Well, congratulations. You got it. She began removing her microphone, her movements deliberate and controlled. But let me tell you what else you got. You got to show America exactly who you are. A man who would question a woman's grief to get a reaction. A journalist who would attack someone's character because staying positive doesn't fit the narrative you wanted. She looked around the studio, at Robin and Michael who looked devastated, at the crew members who seemed frozen in shock, at the audience who sat in stunned silence. I want to say something to everyone watching. I came here today because I love this show and I love connecting with people. What happened here isn't what Good Morning America is about. Robin and Michael, they're good people. They didn't know this was going to happen. She looked at George one final time. But you knew. You came prepared to tear someone down. And you chose to do it to someone who spent 40 years trying to lift people up. That says everything about you and nothing about me. She started walking toward the exit, then stopped and turned back. You asked earlier why I don't talk politics. Here's another reason. Because political people, people like you who see everything through that lens, they've forgotten how to be kind. They've forgotten that there are things more important than winning. They've forgotten that being right doesn't mean much if you lose your decency in the process. Her voice softened, the anger giving way to something more like sadness. Those 8 people who died in that crash, they would be so disappointed if they could see what happened here today. Not in me, in you. Because they knew what it meant to treat people with respect. They knew what it meant to show up for each other. And they would be heartbroken to see someone use their memory as a weapon against the person who loved them most. And with that, Reba McEntire walked off the set of Good Morning America, leaving behind a studio that felt like it had witnessed something that couldn't be taken back. George sat in silence, his carefully composed expression finally cracking to reveal something that might have been shame. Robin was openly crying. Michael stared at the empty chair where Reba had been sitting, looking like he'd just watched something precious be destroyed. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the aftermath. The producers in the control room scrambled to figure out how to handle what had just happened. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing the fact that they had just witnessed the Queen of Country walk out of an interview for the first time in her 40-year career. In the days that followed, the interview would become national news. Country music fans would rally around Reba, expressing outrage at the way she had been treated. Journalists would debate whether George had crossed a line, whether grief was fair game for questioning, whether authenticity was something that could be interrogated or only demonstrated. Robin Roberts would issue a public statement saying she was deeply troubled by the direction of the interview and that it did not reflect the values of Good Morning America. Michael Strahan would post a simple message on social media. Reba McEntire is a national treasure and should be treated as such. Period. George Stephanopoulos would not apologize. He would stand by his questions as legitimate journalism, even as the backlash grew. It was, perhaps, the most telling response of all. A man so committed to being right that he couldn't see how wrong he had been. And Reba herself would do what she had always done when life knocked her down. She would get back up. She would go on tour. She would sing the songs that had sustained people through their hardest times. She would prove, once again, that grace under pressure wasn't a brand. It was just who she was. That was the real Reba McEntire, not the marketing strategy George had tried to expose, not the calculated image he had tried to deconstruct. Just a woman from Oklahoma who had loved and lost, and survived and kept singing. A woman who had learned that kindness was not weakness, and that staying true to yourself was the only success that mattered. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was George Stephanopoulos out of line, or was he just doing his job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.